Hey folks, good evening. This is Monday, March 8th. You may not get this for a day or two, but as some of you know, my dad passed rather unexpectedly last week, and obviously, you know, miss him and grieve him and so forth. So I'd like to read you the eulogy that I wrote and that I'll give at his funeral this Wednesday. But before I do, some of you may, be interested in that, some not. I've got a couple quick related or just news updates for you, and then Rick also will send a link out, a Zoom link to the funeral services. So those of you that knew him or had an interest will be able to watch that live this Wednesday, March 10th at 11 o'clock, I think it is. All right, so a couple of things. The market, continues to show some froth, and it's like almost every day now we're seeing articles in Wall Street Journal and other press about how frothy the market is. And I think one got my attention this morning, and please don't get too upset. But it was like, gee whiz, you don't know a bear market until you've lost 90%, or you haven't lived through a bear market until you've lost 90%. Not that I'm predicting that, but I think a significant downdraft is in the offing sooner or later. Bond prices are starting to, I don't want to say plunge, but go down significantly. And the trend seems to be galvanizing or lengthening and becoming a real trend. Tech stocks got hammered, quite overvalued. So we're in for some bumps, and I want you to know that we are kind of have been anticipating this and are very vigilant and expect we're prepared, we think, to make the best of it. That's a good way to put it. Some COVID news, good news and bad news, actually. You Floridians, there's a form that was issued last week. Kim found this for me. Actually, that's not the right form. I apologize. This is it. COVID determination of extreme vulnerability form, which my Mayo doc was kind enough to sign for me. At that point, I was qualified as a caregiver for my dad. I was in Tallahassee with him, and actually was fortunate to be with him the evening that he passed asleep peacefully. But in any event, so this form, if you are, can get a doctor to sign the form, then you're eligible for the vaccine under 65. The bad news is you can't go to a routine vaccination site. As I learned, I showed up, I was turned away. You need to go to a doctor's office or a pharmacy or someone who has elevated medical training to administer the vaccine. Just the techs that are there, these mass vaccination sites, apparently are not qualified to do that. So that's the bad news, but it may give you some hope. The good, and well, I shouldn't say also good news and bad news. So I went today to go stand by, hoping that some people wouldn't show up and I'd be able to get vaccinated. And amazingly, I did the very first time. And I was chatting with one of the workers there who told me that it's amazing how many people don't show up. How horrible! How discourteous! What a waste! Really, what a colossal inefficiency. But those of you in Florida that are not over 65 and want to get dosed, want to get vaccinated, I strongly encourage you to find the centers and show up, in this case, at 4 o'clock. 4:20 is when they make the call. It was not going to come. And a whole bunch of us went through and were processed. And if you do get the first dose, then you qualify for the second dose. They'll give you an appointment card, regardless of your age. Once you got one, you're going to get them both. So hopefully that's some use to you. Okay, so now this is what I expect to read for Dad. Russ Camarda, who passed at nearly 94 the wee hours of last Friday morning. So, howdy, folks. This is Dr. Jeff Camarda. Please forgive the poor video quality. I'm heading to Tallahassee for my dad's funeral tomorrow. And I promised you all that I'd share my words of eulogy, so those that have an interest continue, and if not, thanks for watching. We'll catch up next week. So Russ Camarda really was a great man. He was a powerful man, a man who could command attention and respect with a mere whisper. A whisper from him, and a room would fall silent, waiting for what he might say next. I did not inherit that gift.
I usually have to yell. But not Russ. Russ was a man of great power, great charisma. He was an exceptional leader. He had a keen intellect. But he was most special for his incredible ability to connect, to bond, to love, and make feel well nearly all the people that he interacted with. For his 80th birthday, nearly 14 years ago, us boys gave him a plaque which said, in part, "To Old Rusty, for a lifetime of inspiration, encouragement, sacrifice, selfless love, and relentless instruction," in the finer points of sarcasm. Pappy, we ain't fit to shine your shoes. And we weren't, and we're not. Of course, he shared these treasures of love with his family, but that's not who I'm talking about. You all that are listening to me that knew him, you know who I'm talking about. All of you. And thousands more stretching back in a continuous stream for more than half a century. Countless thousands of people, and especially thousands of students, who had the great privilege and honor, the great gift of crossing his path. He had the unique gift of making each person, each student feel special and wonderful. Even as he handed out detention, he was loved and revered for it. Why? Because he did it with selfless love and deep caring. He accomplished many great things in his life, but these are not the things that are usually counted great in the world. He did not choose to be a titan of business. He did not become a towering political figure. He did not pursue power or fame or the riches of the world. All of these things were within his grasp. He had great powers, but he did not use these powers for personal gain. He pursued the riches of the heart. As the Beatles sang so long ago, in the end, the love you take is equal to the love that you make. And the love that he takes is by the carload, by the starship load. The outpouring is unprecedented. The night before he died, a guy named Sheldon called from California to express his condolences. Who was Sheldon? He graduated in Russ's class of 1960. He said he still owed 500 hours of detention. How did he know? Beats me. Russ was his own cult of love. People just stayed connected to him because of the love that he radiated on them. There will never, ever be another like him. For my PhD course in gerontology, Pop graciously permitted me to interview him as an academic subject and write up a paper. My thesis was to counter some textbook arguments of inevitable cognitive decline. He actually agreed to be interviewed by the entire class, and of course my cohort loved him. On a personal level, I learned things about Dad I would otherwise never have known, for which I'm deeply grateful. I'd like to share a brief excerpt drawn from that paper, based on the interview, and I bet there's some stuff here that you don't know either. He was 86 when I wrote this, almost exactly 8 years ago. And I quote, "I grew up near the Red Hook neighborhood in Brooklyn. I volunteered for World War II, was in the Army Air Corps, trained as a weatherman, and served on Iwo Jima. After the war, I went to college in Florida, and majoring in political science with an eye toward the Federal Foreign Service. My goal was thwarted when I returned home to Brooklyn and fell in love, taking a job in insurance sales and eventually with an investment bank on the foreign currency exchange desk. While I enjoyed the pulse of the Manhattan job, I found the mandatory after hours and immoral culture eventually intolerable, and I moved on. This was the beginning of the baby boom, and jobs and education abounded. I soon found myself in my late 20s teaching 6th grade. I had the opportunity to advance in grades with my initial students. I disregarded practice, which I found quite effective, and which really produced some wonderful student-teacher bonds that have persisted to this day, 60 years later. I eventually rose to chair of my high school Department of History, became assistant principal, and though I traded my love of teaching for the higher pay and summer work of administration, which came to embroil me in the social tumult of the late 1960s, and ultimately the riots in the school, all frequent for years, ultimately forced me to move my family after an attack on my home. I remember that. I remember that quite well. Somebody threw a Molotov cocktail in our backyard. But such, he says, was the price of the day. I remained in this Long Island position until my first retirement in the early 1980s. I'd always wanted to return to Florida. And once I qualified for a full pension, I moved to Tallahassee and took a job which eventually led me back into teaching a little, something I really loved and missed. I was now in my mid-50s and working in the state of Florida's Emergency Preparedness Department, mostly training citizens to prepare for disasters. I also was quite involved in government emergency response and recovery operations, so I think of this as my hurricanes and helicopters period. I became very close to my bosses, so when they retired, so did I. So such began my first real retirement. He's lucky in his mid-60s now, right? Which I spent mostly reading, watching sports, especially FSU football, which he followed since the 50s, and playing golf full-time with what he called old fogies. He was now 66, thinking about moving to Italy to pass his final days. His wife, Marion, was still teaching full-time at Maclay, and when her boss approached me about a slot that he had open, I was excited to apply. Unlike public teaching jobs, these are annual renewable contracts, so you're really good for a semester or a year. But he had been at this time retained there for 21 years. I am now 86 and have just been picked up for another year and assured I'll have a place here so long as I want it. When I asked him why he continued to work, he said love of teaching and to keep his mind active, maintaining mental acuity. He said, I remember how active and engaged my own father was, Michelangelo Camardo, before retirement, and how quickly he faded once he was retired. He sat in the sun drinking wine and smoking cigarettes. I remember him there in Staten Island and Richmond Avenue, Jeff, sitting there in a lawn chair. Back to Russ. He said, I did not want that to happen to me. And the lesson I took was I should never stop thinking or learning and working in order to preserve my zest, interest in life, and mental and physical well-being. I asked him, are you aware of your aging? He says, yes. Do I dwell? No, I have no ailments to distract me. I jump out of bed each morning. He's 86. Life is very good in much as it has been. My aging perception is more of an occasional thought of, oh yeah, I'm old, than a focal point in my life. It does not dominate or control my thinking. My brother, Jeff's brother Michael, told me a story last week about them being in a New York City shop when Russ was in his 70s, and the clerk pointed to the elevator. Hey, old man, it's over there. And just to mess with him, Russ ran up the stairs fast and accurately instead. Now, I remember maybe 7 years later, him jumping straight up nearly 4 feet in the air to inspect the house that I was building then. Even in my 50s, I had trouble doing that. Now, forget about it. So when I asked for that paper what his greatest goals or hopes for the future were, these were his words: to continue as I am teaching as long as I live. He made it almost to the end. He retired probably at 91, I think. And because he just became dissatisfied with the school, not because he couldn't do it anymore. And family continuity for my wife after I passed. That was his greatest wish. Well, he taught almost to the end and would probably have never stopped had things not changed in Maclay, as some of you know. What a remarkable life. What a remarkable man. And of all of his journeys and all of his accomplishments, he considered his military service in the Army Air Corps that of which he was most proud. Well, Pop, we're very proud of that service, but we are proudest not of that, but proudest of the incredible beacon of God's love that you were and are, like a bodhisattva, like a saint even. You are with us always, but we miss you desperately until we meet again. In his last days, Dylan and Dante and Kim and I were fortunate to have joined Russ and Marianne and Michael. We were there last week, the week that he died, the night that he died. The night of his death, before he went to sleep, I was alone with him and I got to lay my hands on him and pray. And it was just us at that point. He seemed to be having, as he lay there uncomfortably on the bed, a nonsense conversation. The words kept popping up, straight up, straight up. I thought it was gibberish, right? Until I said, Pop, I love you. To which he immediately responded, I love you too. He was not delirious. He was concentrating. And I think talking to his advisors or angels or whatever you want to call them that were preparing him for the journey. Not until tossing and turning in the wee hours of that night later, perhaps after he had passed, that I realized by straight up, he meant straight up to heaven. And his conversation again with those that would speed his way there. Well, here's to you, Pop, straight up all the way. We love you. We'll never forget you. We'll never stop loving you until we meet again. Hell of a guy.